This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of For the Good of the Game. My name is John Davis, JD, and I'm your host. And I have a very special guest today who has a little more historical connection than a lot of my guests do. Today, we're going to be talking to Drew Pittman. Drew is a former D1 soccer athlete who played at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. He is a devoted husband and father, as well as Christ follower. He is a published author. He has a book that we're going to talk about today called First Team Dad, a playbook for a winning family. And he is a principal for Shark Sports Management. They represent both athletes and coaches, which is somewhat unique when you think about and consider the potential friction that goes on between coaches and players sometimes, but they do manage professional athletes and coaches. And I want to welcome Drew to the program. Drew, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Hey, JD, it's great to be with you, man. And so glad that we reconnected after all the years. And it's really been awesome to hear about the stuff that you're doing and the impact that you're making on people's lives and especially families, which obviously is very important to me. So kudos to you and really appreciate you having me on.
Well, I got to tell you, when we first started our dialogue and kind of getting reacquainted and stuff, and just so anybody who sees this or hears this knows, Drew and I participate in a weekly Zoom Bible study with a group of the larger groups, probably 30 guys that are either connected through our high school or through their college days. And we do this Bible study, for an hour or so each Friday. And it's actually very refreshing and it's a great way to connect and talk. But when I first heard that what you were doing professionally as an agent and that you had written the book, it was, you don't, and you even talk about this at the outset of the book, it's a little bit not mutually exclusive, but you probably don't see a plethora of strong Christian believers as sports agents because there is such a tendency to be tempted to do other than the right thing. So I want to show everybody this first. This it's an awesome book. I just finished reading it this week. I'm gonna hold it back a little bit. First Team Dad. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. There's it's an easy read of about 30 chapters, great stories and lessons mixed with some biblical references for context and learning. It's got a game plan at the end of each chapter. And there's simple lessons with really what we talk about life skills, things like watching your word, respecting others, responsibility, being creative, motivation. So there's all kinds of chapters and approaches that Drew brings from his personal experience of not only growing up, but also what he's done in his family. So I wanted to, first of all, let you talk a little bit about what prompted you to write the book and, that process that you went through as you were putting pen to paper.
Sure. Well, I appreciate it. And, I did not set out to write a book. Like most guys, I believe most guys, when they get married and then when they have kids, they have a desire to be great husbands and great dads. The problem that we see is that we're not given a manual on here's how you do it when we get married, and we certainly don't, our kids don't come out and say, hey, here's the book, do all these things and I'll turn out great. And so we're trying to figure it out as we go. And most of us, probably the majority of guys, the impetus or the biggest factor in how we treat our wives and how we parent our kids is based on what we saw from our dads.
Sure.
And, the old adage is, your son's probably going to end up being like you and your daughter's probably going to end up marrying somebody like you. Is that a good thing? And so, I think most guys either, if they had great dads, then they try and emulate that. If they didn't have such great dads, then they either end up emulating them anyway because it's all they know, or they go the exact opposite direction. And probably somewhere in between is really where they need to be. And so I like I said, I didn't set out to write a book. I had an aha moment. And that's different than man moment where you, oh man. But I had this aha moment. I live out in the country. My office is in the upstairs of my house. I was coming down the stairs one evening and got to the landing in the stairs and where I could look in and through the living room into the kitchen. My wife was cooking dinner. My boys were sitting at the counter there in the kitchen, and they were laughing and cutting up and kind of poking at each other. And they were 10 and 12 at the time. And my wife was cooking, and they were joking around, and something just hit me, and I stopped, and I looked at them, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're 10 and 12, and I was going to be this awesome, fantastic, super dad, and I realized that in 6 years, my oldest son was going to be out of the house, and that
Crazy.
in probably half that time, neither one of them would listen to but about half of what I said. And so I felt like, I've got, if I'm gonna be great, I really got to start being more intentional about it. And I realized that I was probably a really good dad, and I was probably better than most, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to be great. And so I literally, JD, I got knocked to the ground. I had to sit down on the stairs, and I started sobbing. And I said, God, I don't know what to do. And I said, if you will show me what to do, then I'll do it. And so, I gathered myself, and I went in, and I was, hugging on my boys, and they're like, gosh, what's wrong with you, Dad? It looks like you're crying. And my wife was kind of looking at me funny. So, we had a great night. And then the next day, every morning I get up, and, it's just kind of my routine is that I get up and I have some quiet time. I read my Bible, I pray, and I try and spend at least an hour just being still and listen to what I feel like God's telling me to do.
Sure.
And so I asked him, I said, show me what to do. And I literally that morning, I carried a legal pad in with me, and I started writing things down. And what I found as I looked back is that most of the things that I'd written down were principles that you learn in sports and things that I'd learned either as an athlete or in my business. And so I looked up one day, and I had like 38 things written down. I was like, oh my goodness, I better start trying some of this, or I'm just going to have a good list. And so I started implementing some of the principles, and I was getting great results. I could see the feedback I was getting from my family. And one of the very first thing I did was I made a point to compliment my wife in front of our boys, not just about stuff that they saw every day about how good she was about taking care of them and all those things, but things that they didn't necessarily see. As as we've talked about, my wife is a television film producer, Lane Taft Pittman, and she's very, very good at what she does. And I've actually had her do work for some of my companies in the past, and then I've seen her work, and she's worked for some great organizations, from the American Football Coaches Association to some great authors. She worked on Women of Faith. She works for Max Lucado, and so she's done some really amazing and very impactful things. And so one night I just sat down and I pulled up on the computer that's right there in the kitchen, and I pulled up this clip that she did for Max Lucado one time. I think it's still out there. It's called The Garbage Man, but it is amazing. And I showed him, and I go, your mom did that. And there's women and men and kids who are coming to know Jesus because of what she did. And they were like, wow, Dad, that's so cool. And they looked at their mom in a different light. And then she looked at me in a different light. And I was like, okay, I get it, God. I'm going to be coachable, and so every day every week I started trying to implement more things. And then I looked at the list one day, and it looked like a table of contents. And so through the friend of my wife's who does a lot of work for Max Lucado, I asked her kind of what her thoughts were. She's like, yeah, I think it'd be awesome if you could come up with something like that. So I just started writing, and it literally took me 2 years because I was traveling around in my work, and instead of going into a hotel room and, flipping through the sports channels, I just started writing. And I'm typing out on my computer and sitting at, waiting on airplanes and sitting on planes and all that kind of stuff. I just started writing, and I would take each topic and just write on about how I felt like that principle applied to being a better husband and being a better dad. And just kept saying, God, I don't know what you're trying to do, but if you'll keep opening doors, I'll keep walking through them. And if you shut the door, that's fine. If all this is something for me to help myself and help my family, if that's all you want for this, I'm cool with that. I'm not trying to, do something for something. And so he just kept opening up doors. I met a guy who introduced me to an author, and a guy that he was a consultant to authors, and he helped me get a package put together. And he said, I'm going to send it to 3 literary agents. And the first one said, hey, I think it's really good, but it's really not what I'm trying to do these days. The second one said, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. You'll never get it published. It'll never be a book. It's terrible. And the third guy said, I like it. I want to do it. I think I can get you a deal. And he got me a deal with, it was at the time called Regal Publishing. And it was a big Christian publishing company. And they actually probably about 2 weeks after I signed the deal with them, they sold to Baker Publishing, which is one of the biggest Christian publishers. And I was like, okay, are they going to cancel my deal? And instead they loved it. And, it ended up becoming a book. So that's awesome. Kind of how the process happened.
I got to compliment you on something. And this is really because as I'm sitting there thinking, as you're talking about the time that, I've been married 35 years. We have 4 adult children, 3 boys and a girl. And thinking back about the things that we had done, and as I read through the book, there were a lot of lessons that you talk about in there that I think we had unconsciously incorporated into raising our kids. I know that I've got light years to go to be a better husband, but I think we did a pretty decent job as a couple, particularly within a military family. There's so much of the responsibility falls on the spouse. And I think it's not only thoughtful, but there was a real strong element of self-awareness on your part. And not necessarily from strictly a spiritual sense, but just the self-awareness to say, I'm going to try to get better and apply these things. It's kind of like, people that write self-help books that you come to find out really haven't done any of the stuff they're recommending. It's all fine and good to have knowledge on something, but experiential knowledge is generally a lot better. So kudos to you that, you really internalized and reflected on this and applied that degree of self-reflection within the context of your beliefs and so on as you learned and wrote. That's really neat.
Well, I appreciate that. And, it's funny. I never claimed to be a great husband and a great dad. And like I would, after I wrote the book, I'd blow up at my boys and yell at them, and they'd go, "Oh, first team dad, huh?"
Exactly.
I'd say I didn't write the book because I was one. I wrote the book because I want to be one. And so they couldn't really argue with that. I
have heard many of the people I follow that have done similar things. Mel Robbins famously put out her book, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and she's had her kids throw it back in her face when she's lost her temper a few times as well. I think that I'm working on doing something similar, and it's really interesting. I did not necessarily have an epiphany as much as I did in the context of a conversation, take a suggestion. But 2 years ago, I was out in Phoenix and sitting talking to a friend of mine who is a very successful businessman and also a veteran. And I was talking about the things that I did, and I wanted to put them into a book. And I described what we did. And he said, oh, you were creating margin. Well, that has now become the title of the book, Creating Margin. And it's a story. It's basically debunking the myth of work-life balance, because my wife and I really teamed up throughout raising our kids to keep them actively involved in sports and activities, not just sports, but, you know, all kinds of extracurriculars. But in the military, it's demanding enough, like many other jobs are, that it's difficult oftentimes to take on the responsibility, especially as a volunteer, to coach a team, which I was very interested in doing, and still be able to devote the right amount of emphasis and time to work. And it just, you know, there's a saying in the Army, if the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one. And I did not want to fall into that category of where I devoted myself to my career. I wanted a balance. What I found is that work-life integration was really the way to do it. And so many of the principles that you describe in your book are things that we unconsciously or subconsciously did. And I guess maybe some of that, you know, may have come through common sense, some may have come through faith, and some may have just been serendipity. I don't know, but we, you know, I personally, you know, people talk about legacy all the time, and I can't think of a better legacy that any of us as parents can leave than children who are, you know, God-fearing, law-abiding, productive citizens who continue to make the world a better place. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. And, you know, the last book, or the last chapter in my book is about legacy. And, you know, I tell the story of Coach Landry, and you know, our kids are our legacy. And so it's important. And, you know, one of the things, it's funny, one time my boys had gotten in a fight, and I sent them both to their room. They were both crying already. And then I sent them to their rooms. And so they're crying even more, and I let them calm down, and I calmed down. And then I brought them together, and we sat at the table, and I said, guys, here's the thing. I said, you know, as a dad, I am going to make mistakes. That is the one thing, that is the only thing I can guarantee you, is that I'm going to make mistakes. There's going to be times when I should be harder on you, and I'm not. There's going to be times when I am too hard on you, and I shouldn't be. I said, but the one thing that you have to understand is I take my responsibility of growing and nurturing you two guys into the men that God wants you to be. I take that very seriously. And so does your mother. And it's our responsibility. And I said, you know, the only thing that y'all can, you know, the thing you can count on is that whatever we do as it relates to you guys is because we love you. And so if we make mistakes, which we will, you have to understand everything we do is because we love you. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was great, because they could never, you can't argue with that. And it's like, they go, Dad, you know, I go, hey, and they go, oh, I know, it's because you love us, you know? And so, and then I also told them, I said a little bit what we talked about at the beginning. I said, you know, I am not only helping you guys grow and be nurtured into the men God's called you to be, but 95% of how you parent my grandkids is going to be based on the job that I do with you. So it does not only affect you and me, it affects you and your kids. And then they're going to turn around. It's legacy. And so it's so important. And, you know, I find that so many men, you know, there's this myth that, you know, we want our kids to have a better life than we had. And that's not really how we should be thinking about it, because usually what we're talking about is we want them to live in a nicer house and, you know, be able to go to the lake and play on the boat and water ski and go snow skiing in the winter, and all those things that we, you know, can end up killing ourselves at work to provide for them. And really what they want is they want us. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we are shepherding our kids' hearts, and that's a huge responsibility. And, you know, it requires us to be very intentional.
That's one of the reasons that I always took coaching so seriously, is because, in fact, I'm releasing my 7th episode tomorrow at the time that we're recording this. And one of the coaches on there Mark Evans is up in Pennsylvania, and he is a school counselor in addition to being a head football coach. And we have had numerous conversations about you grow your huddle. It starts with your family. And as a coach, you grow that huddle throughout your career. And I think that you made the point earlier, you didn't use the word, but you made the point earlier. Our kids model what they see and hear. And I think that in the case of a good, solid family, they have a lot to model in a positive way. And sometimes when there's not a good family situation, they have at least something against which to compare that they don't want to model. Right. And I think that in the larger context, so many times kids who either come from single parent families or maybe are being raised by a relative or in a bad situation, that coach is doing the same thing that a father, in the case of a man, or a mother would do for them. And I think that's why I've always taken it so seriously, is because I've had instances where I knew a child was either hungry or had been disciplined poorly or might have been in a bad situation. And I may be the only, sane, confident, caring adult that they're going to see that day. And a lot of times, that can change a child's life, just like we in our own families can, change our children's lives. You can also have that kind of effect on other kids. So I think that there's so many things that, everybody could learn from your book. And we're going to get back into a couple of the chapters as it pertains to, parenting overall. But I want to dig in. The theme for this season is relationships. And I was excited about learning that you were an agent, because I've never really had a friend or even an acquaintance that I know of for sure that was an agent. So obviously, there are many facets of what you do that are challenging, tenuous, but when it all comes down to it, whether you're talking to an owner, a general manager, a head coach, or the athlete, you've got to be able to nurture those relationships to balance the demands and the resources and be able to come up with a package and a contract that suits everybody. Kind of go through that a little bit in terms of philosophically, how you navigate that in line with, your own beliefs and stuff when you work in an industry where guys tend to, lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead.
Yeah.
And I should not say it that way. I'm painting a bad picture. I'm sure there are many other good agents like you out there, but.
Well, the interesting thing is, it's funny, when I first decided to get into the business, I was, I don't know. I was probably at the AFCA convention and ran into John Makovic, and he said, "Hey, Drew, I hear that you're going to be an agent." And I said, "Yeah, coach." And he goes, "You'll never make it." And I said, "Well, thanks." He was the head coach at Texas at the time. And I said, "Thanks, coach. You have the gift of encouragement." And he laughed. He goes, No. He said, all those guys are so dishonest, and, they'll tell the kids anything to get them to sign with them. And, they're not taking care of them, and they're not treating them right. And he said, I just don't know how somebody who's going to do it right can make it. And I said, "Coach, you know what? I may not make it. And if I don't, then that's fine. God's got a plan for my life. And I'm gonna be me, and it's either gonna resonate with some people or it's not." And the thing that I found is that, and I'll say this, it's not just the agent business. It's, accountants, it's investment advisors, it's lawyers, it's doctors, it's, probably every industry. There are guys and girls out there doing things the right way, and there are people out there doing things the wrong way. So it's not just the agent business, but there's so much competition, and there's so much money at stake that I feel like it's maybe a little bit more on display in my industry. And quite frankly, if sometimes I have to tell a player, you know, I don't feel like I'm a good fit for you, or I can't, you know, I'm too full. I got all the players that I can handle right now, and say, well, is there somebody you can recommend? And I will tell you this, other than, you know, my 8 partners, there are probably 5 people that I would confidently recommend in our business. And that's just because of, you know, maybe there's a 100 people that I don't know that if I knew them, I would recommend them. But of the people who are really in the business, there's about 900 people certified to be agents right now. There's about 50 of us that do 80% of the business. And so there's a large number who, you know, just don't have the experience. So that's one issue. But then the rest is just like, you know, there are too many people in our world that have the lack of resolve, maybe, to stand by what they know is right, even if they know it's going to cost them business. And you know, I told my boy, you know, one of the things I've told my boys is that I will always tell the truth. And they're like, oh, well, what if? I go, no, I'll always tell the truth. Like if I'm talking to a client and I was supposed to do something for him, and he says, hey, did you do that? Whatever. If I haven't done it, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I did, but let me follow up on that. I hadn't heard back from them, or whatever the case is. I'm not going to do that, because when I start walking over the line, and getting in a position where I'm losing integrity, then it's a slippery slope, and you'll just slide down. And so I'll say, hey, look, I haven't done that yet, but I will hang up with you and I will take care of it right away. And I believe that, you know, when I've had to do that, and players might go, gosh, you know, he's supposed to do that last week. But I also think they go, you know what? He could have lied to me, and he didn't. So I know I can trust Drew. And so as it relates to your question, and I'm probably talking in circles, I do the same thing with teams. So like teams know that if I tell them something, that I'm telling them the truth. And if a team, you know, if I have a player, and let's say he doesn't have the greatest work ethic. Maybe he's a very talented player, and a scout or a GM or a owner says, hey, Drew, I hear your guy doesn't really work very hard. I will probably tell him, because I wouldn't be representing the guy if I didn't believe it. I would probably say, look, in the past, he probably hasn't had the people understand how to motivate him the right way. He's like all these other guys. He's got an enormous amount of ability, and everywhere he's played, he's been the best. So he really hadn't had to work that hard. And I believe with the right coaching and the right culture, that he can flip that switch, and he's going to get where you need him to be, because he's got the talent. And so I didn't go, oh no, that's not true, they're lying about it. You know how those people are at those colleges, they're always bad mouthing their guy. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to tell them the truth. And, you know, and I tell my players that. I tell them, I'm not lying for you, you know, but what I'm going to do is help you be the best you that you can be, and have the best career that you can have. And I'm going to shoot you straight. And, you know, I tell guys all the time, I'm going to give you a hug if you need a hug, and I'm going to kick you in the pants if you need a kick in the pants. And I'm not afraid to do that. And probably part of it is because now I've been doing this 28 years, and I'm, you know, 60 years old. And so, you know, I'm just going to be me. And I feel like that's what we all should be.
Well, I certainly believe that there is a high degree of likability and trust that can be earned by being authentic. If you're authentic and you find that people, you know, genuinely just don't want to hang around, or, you know, there's always going to be people that don't like us, whether, you know, you and I or anybody else. But that's the way I think you find the greatest connections. And I think the way that you build the most trust. I've talked to that issue with numerous people this year as well as last year about the issue of, especially when a coach in the NFL comes into a team that has experienced players in the position group that he's going to be coaching. There's a degree, no matter who you've coached and how much success you've had, where you've got to earn your stripes. You've got to earn the trust of those players. They have to know that the way you are coaching them and what you are teaching them is, and the way you game plan is going to set them up to be in the best position to succeed and to become a better player. And generally speaking, those relationships, grow when those conditions exist. So I commend you, because it's, the old saying is, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And unfortunately, I'm sure some of those youngsters probably need a kick in the pants sometimes. And Drew, sure. I got to tell you, and I'm sure you've seen it before. In fact, you wrote about it. I want to say it may have been in chapter 18, the one I'm going to bring up in a little while. And the fact that there are a great many players who are drafted into the NFL that go to teams or systems that are they're not a good fit. And it's unfortunate, but there are guys who have shorter careers than they might have had they gone to a more suitable set of circumstances. And it's unfortunate, but it happens. I mean, to have an agent like yourself that is forthright, honest, and so on, but doesn't sugarcoat things, I think would be a much better advantage for an athlete and or coach than it would be the other way around.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think taking it a step further, you're better off with friends that tell you the truth. You're better off with a boss that tells you the truth. You've had commanders that you've been under and, probably a lot that you really respected and looked up to, and you knew they were shooting you straight, and others that you're like, what's his agenda? As parents, we got to shoot our kids straight. We should always be forthright and upfront in who we are with everybody. And I wanted to say this, JD, because I really appreciate the tenor of this season and about relationships, because I really feel like all of life is about relationship.
Sure.
For me personally, it starts with my relationship with Christ, and then it's my relationship with my family. It's my relationship with the people that work for me and the people that I work for as their agent. I feel like I built my agent business on relationships, and it's, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm bragging, but, we'll be watching a game and, somebody will come on TV and my boys will look at me and they'll go, "You got his number, don't you?" And I'll go, "Yeah." And it's like, but it's because you build relationships and you shoot people straight and you tell them the truth, and they appreciate that. And that's how you grow anything that's going to be successful.
I agree. And as humans, we're social animals, and we are wrought with so many failure tendencies anyway. Our nature is to be judgmental. Our nature is to react harshly. Our nature is to protect our own or ourselves, and to walk a path where you are conscious of those things happening and trying to constantly fight that battle internally to be the better person, be the best person you can be, the best version of yourself, is a challenge. And quite frankly, I think it's one that a lot of people in today's society have just given up on. I know Robin Sharma likes to call the society the card carrying cult of mediocrity. And I've always kind of laughed at that, but I see it quite a bit because, it's kind of like recruiting high school athletes. About 2% of high school athletes in this country get heavily recruited. Normally, being in the 98th percentile in anything is a good thing. In this case, it's not. But it doesn't mean that if you're not part of the 2%, you can't succeed. You just have to not act like the rest of the 98%. And I think too many people just don't explore how they can be a better person. And part of that is relationships. It's that social aspect, whether it's internal to our family, our relationship with God, with whomever. It's the reliance and the interaction that I think we get. So I want to kind of dive in a little bit. That's a good segue, as a matter of fact. In chapter 18, which for those that haven't read the book, it's called Play to Your Strengths. And you share a story that I would like you to relate. I'm not going to set it up. I want you to say about marking another player. If you would be so kind to share that, and I've got some questions about that.
You said, I'm sorry, you said the story about what?
About when you were playing at SMU and you were asked to mark another player.
Marking another player. Yeah. So I go to SMU as a freshman. There were only 2 players that the SMU coach recruited to come play as freshmen. He had a pretty veteran team, and I happened to be one of them. And so, as a 18-year-old kid, and I think I'm all that, and I SMU was perennially in the top 20 nationally, and competing for national championships. And some of my friends had that I grew up playing club soccer with in Dallas were playing there, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go take this place by storm. And so I show up at SMU, and things are going pretty well. But then my coach asked me to do something that isn't really what I'm good at. So I'm a forward. So I'm the guy that gets the ball and puts the ball in the net and feeds other players to score up front. I liked it because whenever I had to really run hard, I was usually chasing a goal. And when you're playing defense, you're chasing a person, and it's like they can go anywhere they want. And I had that direction. I was going towards a goal before. So he asked me to mark this, and marking, and if you're not a soccer player, is guarding, covering. So he asked me he tells me, he says, stick on this guy. He goes, North Texas had a kid from Denmark that was really an amazing player. He was really magic. And so he was scoring a ton of goals. And so our game plan was going to be, he was going to put me on him, and I was just going to go wherever he went, and I was going to make his life miserable. And I had no other responsibility whatsoever. I don't know what I would have done had the ball come to me, because it's like, what am I supposed to do? I'm just covering this guy. And I just kick it away from him, I guess. But I actually did a fairly decent job, but that wasn't my strength. That wasn't what I was, what I had grown up doing. It wasn't what I'd been trained to do. I think at the time it was halfway through my freshman year, and I wasn't starting, but I was playing. I think I was the 3rd leading scorer on the team.
Wow.
And we had guys from England and Mexico and Iran, and we had some really good players. And so I was having a fairly successful campaign, and he starts using me in a way that's not my strength. And so it really became kind of the beginning of the end, although it was, I still had 4 years or 3.5 years to go, but he lost me because he never really gained the understanding that I could do something else. And then, as I proved that I wasn't that great of a defender, my playing time diminished. And so how I relate that in the book is that, I feel like I've told my boys this forever, and I tell players this, is that God's got a plan for our lives, and he has gifted us with everything we need to succeed at that plan. And so with my boys, I've got one that's school comes really easy to him. And he can read something. He could read a book and tell you just about anything from that book. And so he's really gifted in that. I've got another son that is crazy creative. And he actually, as a as a sophomore in high school, started his own company where he was doing graphic design for college players and for guys coming out of high school that were going into college. He was doing graphics just for his favorite teams were the Spurs in basketball, and anything Baylor, and then the Tennessee Titans. And some of those organizations started hiring him to do work for them. And then when the XFL came about, they hired him as a high school senior to be one of their graphic design guys. And I thought I was going to help him get a job. And my buddy, I told my buddy about him. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I'll talk to our creative guy." And he goes, "Yeah, I talked to Joe, the creative guy. And I told him that I wanted him, to get this guy in front of this kid named Eli Pittman." He goes, "You know Eli Pittman?" He's like, "If you can get me in front of him, man, I would love to have him work for us." So I didn't even really help him get a job. I just connected the dots. But Eli is like always going, "Man, school's so easy for Jake." And Jake's like, "Gosh, Eli's so creative. I'm not creative." I'm like, God has gifted you both with everything you need to accomplish his plan for your life. And so we shouldn't look at what everybody else has. We should look at what he's given us. Excuse me. So that's kind of the playing to your strengths is, let's not try and be something that we're not. Let's not try and, I've got a nice guitar sitting over in the corner of my office, and I've tried to learn how to play that thing for years. I am not musical. I would love to play the guitar, and maybe if I could retire and do nothing but practice, maybe at some point I could pick it up, but it's just not my strength. So I shouldn't try and move to Nashville and become a guitarist and like your son and write music and all that, because that's not my strength, and that's not God's plan for me.
Well, and I think the way that I crosswalk that into what I'm doing, I've got a curriculum developed for a parent workshop for youth sports parents. And one of the things that I talk about is you mentioned it right off the top. I have a section of the workshop where we talk about, I wish kids came with an owner's manual. It's too often, I think, with regard to our strengths, particularly those we're gifted with, is that we as parents want to imprint what we believe our child's strengths or our own strengths onto our children. And I think that as a parent, I'm certainly not Dr. Spock, but, having raised 4 kids, my experience taught me that 1, they're all uniquely different. And 2, that if you can do nothing else besides love them unconditionally, the next thing is to bolster those strengths. Try to, as best you can, emphatically encourage them to seek those strengths. You hear all kinds of people in psychology talk about, the balance, where you've got to go after the things that are your strengths and you should shore up your weaknesses. And I have come to believe at this point in my life, I am going to recognize my weaknesses. But if it comes to business, I can hire somebody who does that better than me. I would much rather spend time making my strengths stronger, because that's what I think I was put on this earth to do, as opposed to trying to shore up my weaknesses, which the reality is I may never have to deal with. As long as I understand, and I raised my kids, Drew, when it came to sports or anything else, it was you either win or you learn. And I think that as opposed to winning and losing, everybody's going to lose. And that's a reality. And people are going to fail. Failure is the most wonderful teacher of opportunity that you can have. And I think too many times we try and force things on our kids that are counter to those strengths, or even squelch those strengths that they have. And they may not discover them ever or for a long time. And it puts them at a disadvantage. So, I loved the approach that you took in that chapter. And I agree with you 100%. I think that that's one of those that we have to really, try and reinforce. And it just so happens the 2 ideas that came to me, and I was finishing the book yesterday. I'd sent you a note, and I went back and started looking at some of the notes I had taken and things I'd highlighted. And it just so happened, the other one that really stuck out in my mind was the very next chapter, which is Learn the Art of Motivation. And I would like you to, I've got my own version of the story, but I would like you to share the Coach Taft keeping the worms warm story when it comes to, being able to motivate a team.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's probably the story that he gets asked to tell the most. To this day, we'll be out at dinner and somebody will come up and go, "Oh, Coach, tell me that worm story." I want to go back real quick to what you were saying about the last chapter, and you are so right on about winning or learning. And I, one of the chapters that I have is about failure and about what a great teacher it is. And, what I see, I can't wait to see your curriculum about, parents and coaching and really being parents of youth athletes. It's crazy what you see out there. And somebody who coached all my kids' teams, and, I saw a lot, but we have to encourage, and you touched on it when you said, if you start working on your weaknesses and your strengths get to here and your weaknesses were down here and they maybe get up to here, you're nowhere near where you'd be if you left your weaknesses here and then got your strengths way up here. And so you're right on. If I ever wrote another book, that would be a chapter, because it is so critical. And the other part is to encourage our kids not to be disappointed. Like a kid wants to be a pitcher and he doesn't throw the ball very hard, or he doesn't have control, but man, he wants to be a pitcher. Don't go get him pitching lessons. Don't spend $500 a week going, for an hour, 5 days a week with a pitching coach. Tell him to encourage him to figure out if he can maybe, field the ball better, or, bat the ball better, or, play a different sport. And it goes back to encouraging them to figure out what God has gifted them for. Mm-hmm. And, so the Coach Taft story, he was the master motivator. For your listeners that don't know who Grant Taft is, he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He was the National Coach of the Year, I think, in 1982. Coached Baylor University for 20 years, but always took the guys that Texas and Texas A&M overlooked. The bigger schools and the more powerhouse football schools. And he took those guys and found the guys that had the character and had the integrity, and then figured out how to get them to play better than they really were. And he figured out early on that it was by having them believe in themselves. And that's motivation. People think motivation is getting somebody to do something they don't want to do. Motivation is really getting someone to believe in themselves more than maybe what they should on the surface. And so he tells a story about these two Eskimos that were ice fishing. And the setting was they were getting ready to play Texas, and they hadn't beat Texas in 100 years, and they were supposed to get drugged by 35 points. And he goes in and tells his team that, they'd had a great week of preparation. The coaches had put together a great game plan. And he said, it's kind of like those Eskimos that were fishing. And he said, one guy was over there and he wasn't catching anything. And his buddy, who was just a little ways down, was pulling fish out after fish out after fish out. And finally, the guy who wasn't catching anything goes over and he says, we're just, a few feet apart and you're catching everything and I'm not catching anything. What are you doing? And the guy opens his mouth and he's got a mouthful of worms. And he said, you got to keep the worms warm. He said, your worms are freezing and the fish don't like them. And so he'd pull a worm out of his mouth and he said, the coaches are keeping the worms warm for you. And then he ate it. and his players went nuts. And they went out there and they kicked Texas' tail, and that became folklore here in Texas football. One of the things that I think made Coach Taft's story so great about the Worm is that it was about their preparation. It was about the coaches had put together a great game plan. It wasn't about Coach Taft. He was giving his coordinators and his position coaches all the credit, and then it was about, you guys can do it, and while you're doing it, we're behind you. And so it was, I think, all the great teams, whether it's a family team, a business team, a sports team, the great teams are about doing it for each other. And it's about what you've talked about all season here on your podcast. It's about the relationship. Yeah. And if you don't love the guy next to you on a team, or if you don't love the person next to you in your family because you've developed that, then it's not sustainable. And so the great team, I say it all the time, it's no wonder why some teams are always picking first in the draft and some teams are always picking last. It's no wonder. Mm-hmm. It starts at the top with their leadership and the culture that they've devised. And, one of my favorite chapters in the book is chapter 2 about create a culture. And I told the story about going and hearing Nick Saban after he won his first national championship at Alabama. And he'd come from Miami, where he had not had much success, the Miami Dolphins. He had won the national championship at LSU, went to the Miami Dolphins, did not have great success, and came to Alabama. Alabama was in turmoil. They had NCAA sanctions. They'd been, they had Dennis Franchione had left. They hired somebody else who wasn't exactly truthful on their resume and had to get rid of them. And they were in shambles. And Coach Saban said that he's got what he calls the process. Exactly. And if you're listening, go look it up on their website, the University of Alabama football website. It's called The Process. And he said, when I got to Alabama, I said, everybody from the president of the university to the guy that paints the stripes on the fields on Saturdays has to buy into this. And if they do, we'll be successful. And, it took him 3 years. He won his first national champion. Now he's won, I think what he win is 7th or 8th. You start losing track. But I had an interesting experience because one of my coaches was actually Alabama wanted him to come coach for him. And so I got a call one day, and it was no caller ID. And so I generally don't pick those up. And so it dings that I have a message, and I hit the message, and I'm listening to it. And he says, hey, Drew, this is Nick Saban at the University of Alabama. Like he had to tell me where he was from, and I'm like, going, wait a minute. And so I ended up having probably 8 to 10 telephone conversations with him about my client. And just like I say about Coach Taft, people ask me, what's Coach Taft really like? And I say, what you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. And I felt I got the same feeling from Coach Saban, because he wasn't trying to smooze me and, tell me how much my client's going to, benefit from being with him. He just shot me straight, and he said, it's going to be a lot of hard work. And, he said, but I think he'll learn a ton. I think he'll grow and develop. He goes, you've been doing this a long time. You know what you're doing. I'm sure you'll give him great advice. And but those are the types of guys, and those are the types of teams where you create the culture, and then it's easy to add the motivation on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am a lifelong Alabama fan. That hat over my right shoulder is Roll Tide. It's got some signatures on it. One of the guys I played against in high school, as a matter of fact. I have quoted his stuff about, trust the process, and you can see it. And there's certainly other very successful coaches that have similar philosophies and programs. But I think most people now, whether love them or hate them, most people recognize him as certainly the best to ever do it at the college level at this point. You know, and, you know, for what it's worth, I think that motivation has a totally different concept within his program because of that culture. It's more a culture of accountability and the process of, as you said, buying into what they're trying to accomplish and you doing your part, whether you're the fifth string tight end or whether you're the starting quarterback. So
right.
I love that kind of stuff. I wanted to ask you real quick to kind of close out if you, and you kind of talked about it. You said, you know, the context of the story you just told was kind of your favorite chapter, but if you, you know, if you were talking to somebody maybe at the airport and they picked up your book and you saw them looking at it and they were going to be on a short flight and didn't have time to read the whole thing, is there a particular section or chapter or chapters, plural, that you might recommend that they look at if you were going to try to give them some quick advice?
Yeah, I think what I would probably tell them is you can go through the table of contents and see what you feel like jumps out at you, and that every chapter is 3 to 5 pages. You know, one of my I wrote this book for guys like me, because when I was first started writing, I didn't know I was really writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was about, you know, I don't have time. I don't have an hour a day to sit down and read. I just don't. And I probably don't. I have attention deficit, you know, issues. So I don't have the attention span if I had the time. And so I wanted something that you could read very quickly, that would have a story that would be entertaining, and then a principle that would be valuable. But the most important thing is I've read so many books and I get through reading it and I say, that's amazing information. I just don't know how to apply it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted it to be easily applicable. And so I would say, pick out what, you know, what strikes you. You know, it might be legacy. It might be, you know, lean into failure, and it might be, you know, like you know, picked a couple of playing to your strengths and learn the art of motivation, whatever it is. And know that you can, in 10 minutes, read a chapter, be entertained by a story, and then have a principle that you know how to apply to your life and where it can make a difference. And but my favorite 2 chapters are probably Create a Culture, because I'm such a big fan of culture, and I think it's really important. And I think every family has a culture. The question is it intentional, and is it what you want it to be? And so I tell you how you can create one, and it's very simple. And so then the last chapter is Leave a Legacy, and the reason it's one of my favorites, 2 things. One is, like we talked about earlier, it's so important, you know, what we're doing in our homes, because it doesn't just affect you and your wife and your 1, 2, 3, or in your case 4 kids. It affects generations. But the other thing is, I grew up in Dallas, so you know, big Dallas Cowboy fan, and my dad took me to the games, and I became a big fan of the Cowboys and Tom Landry. And I had respect for him as a man. I had respect for him as a professional. I loved the fact that he lived a life that was admirable. And I actually was fortunate enough to, in my wedding album, it's a picture of me and my wife and Tom and Alicia Landry, because they were at our wedding, because they were awesome. Good friends with the Tafts. And but you know, I tell the story about Alicia Landry, Tom's wife, after Tom had retired and, you know, or been forced out or whatever. And, you know, Jerry Jones does the right thing and has a statue built of him. And back when they were at Texas Stadium, they were going to dedicate the statue, and they pulled it out on a platform, had a big truck pulling it out. They pulled it out to the middle, right on the middle of the Blue Star. And Brad Sham, the old voice of the Cowboys, was out there, and Alicia's there, and they're looking up at the statue, and Brad Sham says, "Alicia, what do you think?" And she says, "I remember him being bigger." And I thought, wow, that is legacy.
Yeah.
When they remember you as being bigger, and it's just it's so important. So I would maybe say if you're a Cowboy fan, read the last chapter first. If you're an Alabama fan, read the first chapter. But if you're a sports fan, pick any chapter, and you'll get something that you can actually use.
Well, that may have been why I connected with the book so well, and maybe why we reconnected on that level, because I'm not only a lifelong Alabama fan, but I too am a lifelong Cowboy fan. That's the reason I wore number 12 in high school at Pierce, was because of Roger Staubach. And and I just think that there are so many lessons in this book that people can walk away with. And, not everything is going to apply to every one of you. But I can tell you that if you don't get something out of this, you're just not reading and thinking at the same time, because it's an awesome guide, particularly for, I think, anybody, but certainly new parents as well. And if you're someone that maybe wants to bolster and build the spiritual part of your life, there's some good actionable biblical based principles in there that I think, are worth pursuing as you try to do those things and help your family grow internally. So Drew, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I really want to thank you for taking the time and being amazing at what you do in an industry that encourages people to not necessarily always do the right thing, and doing it in a way that you've been able to build a reputation and be successful, counter to what the coach told you when you started, and do it with class and dignity and certainly with a clear conscience.
Well, I really appreciate it, JD. It's been fun, and you keep doing what you're doing, because you're impacting people's lives and you're impacting families, and that's really what we're all here for.
I agree. And it's a pleasure, and it's a lot of fun. So I appreciate you jumping on board and having some fun with us today. So
awesome, brother. Well, I'll see you on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely.